The Articles of Confederation, it is believed by some scholars to have been based on or inspired by, in some ways, the Great Law of Peace, which was the oral, not written down, but oral set of laws that governed the Iroquois Confederacy, the 5 nations, by this time the 6 nations, which was established sometime in the 12th century, possibly 1142. In a similar fashion, there are separate, in the Great Law of Peace, you have separate tribes that come together for mutual defense and for trade. The Articles of Confederation viewed the states that way. There was no really robust federal government like we have now. It was a loose collection of states. It was actually described in the language of the Articles of Confederation as a firm league of friendship. This is the set of laws that is adopted in 1781. Right? It was drafted by the Continental Congress in 1777. It was put into place in 1781. It only lasts for 7 years, primarily because of this lack of a proactive, robust central government. Pretty much everybody, whether they were even those folks who went to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, recognizing the need for a stronger set of laws, some of those folks are going to become anti-federalists, right? More states' rights-oriented folks. Some of them are federalists, but all of them recognize that the central government, the federal government under the Articles, is very weak, very weak. One of the main reasons, exemplified by, if you skip to the bottom there, Shays Rebellion, right? Shays Rebellion. There is a group of indebted farmers in western Massachusetts, farmers that are having trouble paying property taxes, right? Or there's basically, they owe money for land. There's a lack of a supply of money. This is before the market revolution. There's, generally speaking, there's just a lack of a coordinated economic activity, right? If each state is sort of doing their own thing as far as dictating how much money is going to be printed or whether money is going to be printed or how taxes work, right? The central government, the federal government does not really deal with a lot of that. Then you have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of variation. And so there's generally speaking, as folks see a need for a more uniform economic system. And also the fact that there are folks like this Daniel Shay, the leader of the Shays Rebellion, where these irate farmers are allowed to just sort of protest and for lack of a better term, wreak havoc or cause trouble for a long time. There's not a very strong central government. It doesn't have really a military. And they couldn't make any changes to the Articles of Confederation. I mean, they could, but here's the deal. There's no executive branch. There's no president. There's no Supreme Court. There is a legislative branch like Congress, but each of the 13 states gets 1 voting member. If they want to make a change, if they want to amend the Articles of Confederation, it requires unanimous consent. All 13. Guess how many times they changed the Articles and amended it? You're correct if you said 0. 0 times. Consensus is very hard. Even if they wanted to pass laws, some of the major laws required 9 of 13 representatives, not just a simple majority of 7. Right? The one legacy of the Northwest Ordinance is that land in the West, the land the British acquired after the French and Indian War from Chapter 4, in the Treaty of Paris that concludes the Revolution, America gets that land, right? And it's not yet states yet. So the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, this is under the Articles. The Articles of Confederation, under the Articles, the federal government basically can deal with diplomacy, deal with land out west, right, that it has not yet become states, and deal with Indian nations, sign treaties. And so one of the legacies, really the only substantial legislation from the Articles, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This deals with the old Northwest, not the Northwest of our own time. We think of the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, California. This is the old Northwest, the Great Lakes territory that was once claimed by France. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. There's the ice cream truck again. They're really big fans of Wisconsin. Lots of dairy. Ice cream. That's an ice cream reference. See, this is really intellectual. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This is important for 2 reasons. One, it takes this territory and states that it will be carved into 5 states. Eventually, this territory claimed by the U.S. will become states. This is where we get the term Empire of Liberty that was referenced on a slide in the previous chapter, but I didn't mention it. Empire of Liberty, it's the title of a book by Gordon Wood. I believe it is the phrase used by Jefferson, basically the United States, even prior to manifest destiny, right? Some of you may know the term manifest destiny. That's not a term that comes about till the 1840s. But even prior to that, there's this idea that America is, going to expand. Settlers, average Americans want to move west and acquire land, even if that means displacing Indians. So there's this idea that America is going to expand. The fact that as they expand, territory that comes into the United States is not going to become colonial territory, but will eventually have state constitutions. Everyone will be, a citizen, theoretically. People will become citizens in those states. They'll have an equal place at the table with the original 13 states. So on the one hand, it's empire in that it's expanding and has aspirations to expand. But the fact that territory acquired will become states means that, empire of liberty, that folks will, these states will have an equal place at the table, basically. And this is something that really continues, arguably, the Spanish-American War. It goes until the 1898, 1899, when the Philippines and Puerto Rico are acquired and Guam are acquired by the United States. And those three areas never became states, right? And also the Panama Canal a little later, the Panama Zone, which is controlled by the U.S. But Hawaii had been annexed in the 1890s, but Hawaii becomes a state. Alaska was purchased in the 1860s, but Alaska becomes a state. So really, the Spanish-American War is really the first time that there's a break from this idea that any territory acquired will eventually become a state, and therefore the people in that state will have voting rights, yada, yada, yada. Right? And even Puerto Rico, which is still sort of, there's a back and forth there over the issue of becoming a state. So even there, it's not entirely out of place. So the idea that this territory will become states, and also the idea that slavery will be prohibited in the Old Northwest. These 5 states will not have slavery. This is the federal government saying slaves cannot live there. You cannot have slaves there. And it's also that the federal government is even prior to the Constitution is asserting itself in dictating whether places will be free or slave states. And also this is the Old Northwest, right? This is north of the later on the Mason-Dixon line. This is so prior to this, really you have northern colonies and then northern states varying from southern states in that they're not as dependent on slave labor, but there's no explicit statement. North is where slavery does not exist, south is where it does exist. It's just how these colonies developed. And this is one of the first instances where you actually have written in law, northern part of the U.S., no slavery, right? It creates precedent where there's now there's an even larger regional distinction based on slavery. But other than that, you have a lot of issues with the articles to the point where there is a constitutional convention held in 1787 in Philadelphia. Initially, it was to make changes to the Articles of Confederation.